Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Botanical Biohacking Podcast. Today, I'm going to teach you how to make Chinese medicine diagnosis very, very simple. Now, obviously, I can't do this if you're just learning it for the first time. So this particular podcast episode is really geared toward practitioners. If you're not a practitioner, it may be a little bit dull. However, it may be interesting. Who knows? Now, the problem that I see is that in the United States, people may see 4 patients a day. In China, they'll see up to 100. How is this possible? One of the reasons people are only treating 4 people a day in the US is because they treat 4 people a day and then they spend the rest of the time obsessing over whether the diagnosis was correct or not. And they don't really know how to double check the diagnosis. And one of the problems is that much of the underlying cosmology of Chinese culture, sometimes it's referred to as, like a Taoist construct of thinking. Technically, it predates Taoism. It's just the way of looking at the world is really glossed over. So in school, people will touch on yin and yang theory, maybe upper and middle and lower jiao, but really it has no diagnostic significance. And then right away, it'll be, okay, now it's time to learn Zangfu. Or maybe some schools of thought will say, okay, now it's time to learn in terms of the 5 phases. So really, we have a construct that goes from 1 to 10. And you should be able to double check by looking through any of these vantage points. But instead of having 10 vantage points, you're really only working with 2. So if you have 2 points on a line, do you know if that is a straight line or is it a parabola? You have no idea. And if you have 1 point, you have no idea if you're even looking at a line or a circle. There's not enough information. And this is why you find people who are looking only from a 5-phase lens, 5-element lens, or only from Zangfu lens. They can make up any kind of BS to explain whatever their diagnosis was, but there's no way to check it. It's just guess and check. They think they see something based on some of the patterns, but there's no way to check. And this is because the underlying holistic theory of how these theories link together was never taught and was never understood. And there's a reason for this. Many of the professors don't know. In fact, I learned this after 20 years with my teacher. He said, look, the understanding of the I Ching, the way that these theories work together, it's all one thing, and it's really simple. And it's simple for Chinese medicine, it's simple for martial arts, and it's all one circle. And whether you're looking at it through Sanjiao theory or a 5-phase theory, it doesn't matter, you're looking at the same circle. So the more points of reference you have, the clearer the diagnosis becomes. So I'll give you an example. At 0 and 1, you're really looking at Wuji and Taichi. So with Wuji and Taichi, it is, can they feel a sense of complete nothingness and a feeling of connection with all things? So really, we're looking at some kind of enlightenment here. Medically speaking, it's not that significant. Medically, it gets significant when we get to the 2. So we have 0 and 1, now we're at 2. At 2, we're looking at, is this a yin problem or a yang problem? Is this a qi or a blood problem? Is really the most important. Now, qi problems are best fixed with acupuncture and qigong. Blood problems are best treated with foot soaks, herbal baths, and bloodletting. If you have a blood problem that you're trying to treat using qigong or using acupuncture, can it be done? Yes, but no, it's not the most efficient. You have to look at, is it easier to meditate away a hematoma or to bleed it? It's common sense, and this has to be rooted in common sense. If anything looks esoteric and looks complex, you're in BS land. It has to come back to that simplicity, otherwise it's wrong. Okay, so we have to determine whether it's a qi or a blood problem. Next, we look at, is it in the upper, middle, or lower jiao predominantly? Where is it starting out? Because that's the area strategically that we're going to start in, right? You can look at how somebody's walking. If they're kind of leading with their face, then there's some blockage in the heart, upper jiao, which is causing them to kind of project with the face a little more mianzi, like literally they're using their face instead of their heart to walk forward. If somebody's sort of leading and they're pushing with their hips first, oftentimes it's like an overcompensation for fear. So you can say, okay, problems in the lower jiao. And even simpler, if they're limping because their knee hurts, the problem's in the lower jiao. So again, you come back to this common sense, right? So now we're up to 3. Now 4. These are the 4 movements of qi. This is probably the most glossed over and most central aspect that gets lost. Is the qi rising, sinking, entering, or exiting? So let's take a headache, for instance. Headache is it a qi or a blood problem? Let's say we don't know for right now. We'll come back to it. Now, is it in the upper, middle, or lower jiao? Okay, it's in the upper jiao. It's the headache. It hurts. Is the qi entering, exiting, rising? What's happening, right? Generally speaking, the qi is going to be entering and rising. So then what will the treatment be? The treatment will inevitably be something, in that case, to cause qi to exit and sink. So this must be the central point when you're looking at 5-phase theory, when you're looking at Zangfu, when you're looking at 8 principles and 8 therapeutic modalities. If it does not line up with the 4 movements of qi, you are wrong. If it does line up, you are not wrong, can't be wrong, and you can only be more correct. Because strategically, you're still going in the right direction as far as regulation of gasotransmitters, regulation of qi. So we have a podcast episode that we'll link in the show notes, and it's about flavor theory. It's one of our earlier podcast episodes on how to use the 4 movements of qi to apply that to herbal medicine, apply that to acupuncture, and understand that when it's exiting in order to enter, and when it's rising in order to sink. So these are in fact overlapping cycles, not absolute directions. 4 movements of qi, incredibly important, biggest thing that you were not taught in school in any depth, and the biggest reason why people are stuck treating a few patients a day. It's the biggest reason why people are stuck treating a few patients a day and worrying about it instead of treating 20 and prescribing with confidence and high enough doses because you know that you're right. And that's a very powerful feeling to have. So after the 4 movements of qi, then we have the 5 phases, the 5 elements as it's called in the West quite a bit. So then it is, is it liver attacking? Is it wood overacting on metal or something like this? And it's important at this stage to keep it general. You see there, I automatically kind of skip to Zangfu, which is actually number 10 on the cycle. But you really want to keep it general at that point because there are times that you'll use a herb like Jinyinhua, which is used to clear the lungs, but you can use it for hemorrhoids because you're looking at the effect of taking the fire out of metal. This is kind of more of a Tang Ye Jing kind of way of looking at it, looking at the I Ching relationship. But if you're looking at 5 phases, you're looking at the I Ching relationship. That's what you're looking at. You're just looking at one part of it. So general is important at that stage because also what happens in the Zang will happen in the Fu. So if you are wanting to cool the lungs, you can increase bowel movements, and by cooling down the large intestine, you will cool down the lungs. So what happens in the Zang will happen in the Fu. That is still based on the 5 phases. So this is an idea that I encountered in the U.S. People will say, oh, Zang Fu is TCM, and then 5 phases is something ancient and precious that's preserved only in English. Complete BS. They're both part of the same system. Okay. Next, after we have the metal, or we have the phase relationship, then we go on to number 6. 6 is the 6 channels. And we think of it as 12 channels, fine, 6 channels. You can also look at it in terms of Shang Han Lun theory, fine, double check it that way. Either way is fine. Either way that you've compartmentalized that information is fine. It's literally the same thing. When it comes down to understanding Yang Ming, Taiyang, these kind of 6, we often think, okay, like it's a separate thing with the 6 climactic factors, like, you have wind and cold and this kind of thing. An ancient way of looking at the space between heaven and earth was also based on, Taiyang, Yang Ming, Xiaoyang, this kind of thing. So the relative distance between yang to yin is divided into these 6 phases, which is the channels and their general relationships. And in ancient times, there wasn't a gallbladder meridian, there was a Xiaoyang meridian, which was later attributed to the gallbladder. So I think this is important to differentiate, and when you're looking through that vantage point, go ahead and save the gallbladder relationship for Zangfu, and when you're looking for the 6 phases and the channels, consider instead the relative distance between yin and yang when it comes to Xiaoyang and Taiyang and Taiyin. You can absolutely use this one system as far as diagnostics, but then you still want to double check it with the 4 movements of qi, with the 5 phases. You can definitely, different schools of thought will take one of these as their primary filter, but you still double check with the other filters. And you don't need to be a master of all of these filters. You can get pretty good at 1 or 2, good enough, and then double check them with the others. Okay, next is the 7 stars. 7 stars you probably didn't hear in school. The 7 stars relate to 2 aspects. One are the 7 emotions, and the other are the joint alignment in the body. Unless you learned bone setting in school, I didn't. I learned it from my Kung Fu teacher, James Shun, because that is a part of Chinese medicine, but it's usually more associated with the martial arts. You learn how to unset bones, you learn how to set them. And then there are the 7 emotions, which will relate, like the San Hun Qi Po, the 3 Hun of the liver, and then the 7 Po of the lungs. These emotions also have effect on joint alignment. And there are some types of osteopathy which look into that, like, the way you're holding your shoulders may have to do with, your emotional state and body language. This isn't something that Chinese medicine, as it's taught in the West, and even as it's taught in like Beijing, it doesn't cover this. To learn this, you generally need to go with a martial art sect like Ome Pai, Tanglang Pai, Shaolin Pai. This means like a system. And the difference with systems and styles, I'll just cover that real quick. A style uses one of these. So you pick 6 harmony, and then you add a style. So within Kung Fu, it might be 6 harmony mantis, or it might be plum flower, which means the 5 mantis, which means that they have come from a complete system, but they're focusing on one aspect of this. So if you hear somebody say, well, I do, say, 5 element, that's my system. It's not a system. It is a style. A system comes from a larger body of knowledge, and it will include music and martial arts, and it'll really be a holistic way of looking and approaching the world. These are kind of like ancient universities, these different Taoist and Buddhist sects. And then when you have that framework, then you can go ahead and say, wow, I really like working with 5 phases. Then this becomes a 5-phase style, but it's not a system. It's a method, not a pai. It's a fa, not a pai, to use the Chinese words. So anyway, 7 stars is followed by the 8 principles. 8 principles we learned, yin and yang, hot and cold, etc. And aspect of that is rarely taught, I'm finding, are the 8 therapeutic modalities. So based on what's happening, maybe you have phlegm in the lungs, the treatment principle for that is vomiting. How many times do you hear in American TCM school that someone's been prescribed herbs to make them vomit? You see this in Indian medicine a little more, but the therapeutic modalities are the overall strategies of what needs to happen. And this is really a subset. Remember, we have the 4 movements of qi. That is just the 8 are a subset of those 4 movements of qi. So if you want to, you could absolutely just go with the 3 jiao, upper, middle, or lower, 4 movements of qi, 8 principles. You can do that. It's okay. Just make sure you have at least 3 of these so that you know that you're dealing with a straight line or a parabola and you get some points of references. So we have the 8 going both ways. Then we have the 9. 9, when we're dealing with 8 as well and 9, we're dealing quite a bit with the I Ching understanding of it. Oftentimes this gets misinterpreted as being feng shui stuff or astrology stuff. It has overlap, but it's not quite the same thing. It's more like the farmer's almanacs that you find in China. So it's not so mysterious and esoteric as much as the farmer's almanac will say, hey, today bugs will probably hatch because we figured this cycle out. I find that this tends to be pretty culturally specific and not all that applicable in all cases. So I like things that are pretty simple and universally applicable. So I don't tend to be calculating people's birth dates or something like this. However, when you're looking at how to use the I Ching and how to use, let's say, the 9, the way that I learn most applicably to do this is instead to look at, okay, you have something that's coming at you. You have some kind of chaos, and you're going to make order out of that chaos. So with the I Ching, you can use that like, okay, this general type of movement is coming at you in martial arts, and we're going to use the I Ching to calculate and figure out what's the best application for that. And it works really beautifully. Now, the 9 is often used to balance herbal formulas. If you've ever done a Sudoku puzzle, then you've already played with this. You've literally played with this. So the way that the 9 is set up is to use the I Ching to balance an herbal formula or to design a strategy for acupuncture. Now, most of us don't need to be in a position where we're always developing that. If you're using an existing formula from the Shanghan Lun or Li Dongyuan, that was already calculated according to the 9. So if you're copying someone else's work, you don't really need to mess with this. But if you're wanting to create something really new and have it not mess with the body too much, then looking at it from the perspective of the 9 is pretty important. Now, 10, this we're pretty familiar with. The 10 is the Zangfu. So the lung, large intestine, liver qi attacking the spleen. This is number 10. And this is generally where it all ends up. So that's what we talk about in school quite a bit is, okay, is it liver qi attacking the lungs or what's going on with that, right? That's the Zangfu. Zangfu is still the last window to look at. So, clinically, I'll just look at it like, okay, this looks clearly like, liver qi attacking the spleen, something like this. But is it? Then we look at upper, middle, or lower jiao. Okay, it's involving the lower and middle jiao, all right? Is it what's happening with the qi? So the qi is entering and rising, okay? Now, what if I said liver qi attacking the spleen, but the qi is entering and sinking? Can I be correct? No, I can't. At that point, we know it's liver qi attacking the stomach because the stomach qi goes down and the spleen qi goes up. And this is important for diagnosis because people will say, oh, it's liver qi attacking the spleen, and then they'll pick a formula based on that, and it'll be going in the wrong direction. So these points of reference need to line up, and when they do, diagnosis is simple and elegant and beautiful, and then you, most importantly, have an ideal strategy based on the 8 treatment modalities. And with that strategy, you're not wrong ever, but you can be less correct or more correct. And that's where the refinement comes in. So for me personally, I'm not that interested in picking one of these as a style and getting crazy refined and being a master of one of these vantage points, because as individual vantage points, they don't matter. It's only when they're combined that they really provide you with context, simplicity, and relevancy that you can then translate into a biomedical standpoint if you need to, and you have that simplicity to go from so that you actually know what's going on. And once you know what's going on, then you can really provide the patient with an accurate prognosis based on the disease progression. If you don't know where it is, you don't know where it came from, you don't know where it's going, you can't provide a prognosis. And if you ask any patient of Chinese medicine what is most frustrating, it's that the doctor doesn't tell them, so this is what's going to happen. In 2 months, for the first 2 weeks, this is going to happen. After that, the next 2 weeks, this is going to happen. And when you look at the great doctors in Chinese history, like Huo Tuo, he would tell people, in 3 years, on the second night of autumn, that's when your father will die. Don't let him know. And it would happen, within that 2-day period. It's just crazy accurate prognosis. And that's not something you see today, because Chinese medicine today is all but dead so long as this 1 through 10 is not understood. As long as it becomes one of these that is practiced ad nauseum, it loses the nuance and it loses its simplicity. It's supposed to be simple. It's an elegant and complex structure that can allow idiots like me to do brilliant work. If you have the construct, you can be incredible. But if you don't have the construct, you have the weight of the world on your shoulders with every single patient. If you'd like to receive an email from me on the show content, references, and contact information for our amazing guests, then you'll want to go to botanicalbiohacking.com. Scroll all the way to the bottom of the page. There you can sign up for our email, like our Facebook page, and rate us on Stitcher or iTunes, all in one convenient location. Thanks again for listening to the Botanical Biohacking Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Miles.